McCullough. She is somewhat of a native here and very well known. Miss McCullough, that was a wonderful talk you gave. It was like a packed house here.
It was exciting.
There was a lot of people, and then when you got done, it was a lot of hugs, a lot of smiles. You obviously have a lot of friends here in Thomasville.
Well, this is where I was raised. This is my roots in South Georgia. I grew up in Dixie, Georgia, which is just right out of Thomasville. And then my children were all born here, 3 of them. I taught at Central, was a high school principal in the 70s. So a lot of these people here, I either taught or parents of the people I taught, and my family, because I come from a big family of 9. So there was just a lot of us and a lot of friends. So it was good to come home and see people I hadn't seen. I went to First Baptist Church for 10 years and taught Sunday school there. And it's just good to come back and renew old acquaintances and get a hug and just encourage one another. Because this has been the day of encouragement. That's what we wanted to do.
And that's your motivation speech was
Yes.
I Can Day.
Right.
There's a history behind your I Can. Give us a little breakdown how that happened.
Well, it happened in the 70s when I was a high school teacher here. And so many of my children just said, I can't do something, Ms. McCullough. You don't know where I come from. And back then, I too had come from poverty. I too had come from a poor family. My daddy had died. We were on welfare. But I was too embarrassed of my background to tell people that's where I came from. And I wished I had when I was a teacher. But because I could have said, honey, I know how you feel. Or it's not where you start, it's where you finish. But then I didn't feel as good about it. And so I began telling my story when I went to work for Zig Ziglar. But before that, when my kids would say, I can't, I said, honey, there's no such thing as I can't. So I made a homework assignment. I asked them to bring me. Now, I taught business law at Central, seniors. And I said, I don't want y'all to say I can't. Can you tell me what an I can't looks like? I said, okay, if you cannot prove to me there's an I can't, by tomorrow, I want you to bring me a tin can. Now, I was a business teacher, so it's just a little unusual for a business teacher to say bring a tin can, but they all did it. And so I had cut out pictures of eyes, now like your eyeball. And so when you take a can and you put an eye on it, you have what?
I can. Right.
That's right. So this is what I say. I said, there's no such thing as I can't. And so I give out those labels, and of course I have a website, and it's just www.mamie.com. That's simple. That's my website. They can copy that off of my website, or it's in all my books. They can pass it along. But it made an impression. There were some kids here that I taught 40 years ago today that said I still have my I Can label from back, 40 years ago. Because it's that little thing. So my philosophy was, don't say I can't. And really, my 3-year-old at that time taught me what I can't really means. One day I went in and she said, Mommy, I can't tie my shoe or something. I said, oh, baby, don't say I can't. I won't allow that. And I said, I won't let my students say it, so I'm not going to let my children say it. So she looked up at me in her big blue eyes and said, Mommy, I don't know how. So she taught me, and this is how I raised my kids. Now, I probably couldn't do it today, but this is how I raised mine. They're done. It's a done deal now. When you say I can't, it either means I won't or I don't know how. Now, if you don't know how as a mother, let me teach you. And if you won't, let me spank you. So that was my philosophy in raising children. And now it's wonderful because I have 6 grandbabies. And I see my children, my adult children, raising their children with the I can, or I'll try, or I think I can, or don't be afraid of change and those kind of things. So it's something that just you hand down.
Well, you obviously made a huge impression with your children. You made a huge impression with this crowd. You're a motivational speaker. Right. You go out and do this, but you also have 5 books. Yeah. Tell me about these books. What was the inspiration behind them?
Well, I think when I began speaking, I wrote a course called I Can, and it started at Central High School. Now 5 million children have taken it, at least. But it's all started when I read Zig Ziglar's book, 1974, and I was a business teacher, and I thought, attitude and self-esteem and relationships, all this is so important. Why don't we teach it in school? Because you need to have all that to survive in the business or any world. So I asked permission from the Thomas County Schools to teach a course.
So basically you started out teaching part of the Zig Ziglar course in the school?
I took his first book and wrote a course from it. And his first book, by the way, was not See You at the Top. It was Biscuits, Fleas, and Plum Panels. I sold that to the board, so, if I can sell that, anybody can sell anything. But the kids learned about attitude, and I called it Success Unlimited, I Can, and something else. But it made a difference in these kids. And of course, that went over. I taught people how to encourage one another and speak to one another and use the little one-liners to encourage.
So basically, you used that, and working with the kids was your inspiration to maybe put it down on paper?
Absolutely. And then I went to work for Zig, and I worked for Zig Ziglar in Dallas. That's what made me leave Thomasville and go to Dallas. My husband and I were a husband-wife team with Zig. And I didn't go as a speaker. Because I'd never taken speech even. But if there's something that you need to do, there will be a way.
And you say, I can.
I can. I couldn't say I can't. So I started speaking, and then I wrote my first book because people said, you know, you tell Zig stories. I bet you have some stories. And I started telling my story. And, of course, I used the bumblebee because, you know, aerodynamically, a bumblebee cannot fly. His body is too heavy, and his wings are too light. He doesn't know that, so he flies. So my point was you can be what you want to be. With the
I noticed that you did have that I can be, so you add that in there with the I can.
And of course I use the yes, because we need to say yes to life, yes to the good things, yes to health, yes to caretaking. And today it was to make people aware, to get involved and volunteer and give their services. So we just wanted people to feel good about themselves and encouraged, and that was the main thing today. But back to the book, excuse me. This was my first book, I Can, You Can Too. And then the second book was Get It Together and Remember Where You Put It. And then I've written two kind of, I call them coffee table books. And then my last book that I've written is I'm Not Waving, I'm Drowning. And that talks about abuses in life. And a lot of times when people say, oh, I was used as a child, they think it's sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. But there's many, many more kinds. Physical, and it's all emotional, and the different kinds. And my philosophy is, come from a simple psychologist, what can you do? What can you do to come back? Not so bad all the bad things that happen to us.
But focus on overcoming it and then just work around that?
Right. Because you're never going to forget it, but you don't focus on it. And a lot of people don't know how, that you have to grow. You have to learn, you have to read, you have to listen to tapes and things. Now, I'm really excited. I'm putting out my first children's book this Christmas. And it's some stories that I'm telling about Skeeter, Scatter, and Scudder, 3 squirrels that lived on a creek in Dallas. And my son, Brian, is the little boy. And I started making it for his children about 3 years ago. And how he took them on all these adventures. So I'm publishing that this year. And then I do seminars, and I'm doing another book called Salt and Pepper. And it's on diversity, how to get along with people of all diverse cultures.
Well, Miss McCullough, you're very busy. With all the speaking and the book writing, how do you manage your time?
Well, everybody has 24 hours. And I think I'm a high-energy person.
Yes, you're definitely high energy.
But you know what? I just think as long as we can keep moving and keep using our minds and growing, that, you know, I think we all have something to give. And
you said that you were speaking to a lot of youth. How were you getting your books and your information across to these youth?
Now, you mean in schools? Well, I wrote a course called I Can that had a teacher's guide and all.
But the schools would purchase your course, and the teachers, would they be trained by you? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
We had seminars that we trained them in the I Can way of life. And then now I do lots of work with educators. I go in, and first of all, I encourage the teachers. Yes, there's problems, but we're not going to deal with the problems of education. And I don't think we have an education problem. I really don't. I think we have a society problem. And education gets blamed for a lot of things that they shouldn't be. It's the parent's responsibility. I think as a parent, I need to take care of my children and see that they are educated and well taken care of in manners and all this. And a lot of times they think somebody else ought to do that. But I think as a parent, and my husband died when they were small, and I raised them as a single parent. But you know what? That's not an excuse for having any bad kids. I think with the right values and education is the key. I just think if you don't have education, then you don't have these options and opportunities to grow.
Right. Well, you are inspirational, and we're so fortunate to have you here.
Well, I love coming home. Thank y'all for having me.
Okay. Thank you for watching Thomasville Today. Until next week, have a good one.